Welcome back. We will be looking at forecasting methods in this video as the final component for the budgeting and budgetary control chapter of your APM syllabus. Let's have a look. Just to give you a gist of things, what will happen here is a recap essentially, because all of the forecasting techniques have been recapped or have been looked at and taught in detail for F5, in particular for ACCA. But there are concerns, there are challenges. Of course, you might forget. It might have been a long time since you looked at it. Maybe you looked at it in a different course or different degree program, because you're coming in from a different line. Whatever the reason may be, I want to clarify this: you will not get to forecast. Forecasting is not a test for APM. It's something that has already been done for you. Why forecasting knowledge is important is because you have to understand how exactly do you determine between an appropriate forecasting technique to something that is inappropriate. Because what the examiner is going to do is they are going to put you in situations where forecasting is being used. They might even share information about the forecasting techniques, the numbers, the results, and the examiner will ask you, are they doing the forecasting in the right manner? What is your evaluation? Do you have any recommendations? That is why forecasting information or forecasting knowledge is relevant for you, because you know that in the broader concept of budgeting, ultimately it comes down to estimating numbers, estimating future numbers. And in order to estimate the future numbers, you have to use various forecasting techniques as you see on the screen, which is what you've learned in F5. So you have to have a good understanding of those. And that is what we will be looking at in this, quickly as a recap. Okay, so in summation, these are the different methods of forecasting you have uh, to understand: the high-low method, regression analysis, time series analysis, and the learning curve model. So what we're going to do is we're going to quickly recap high-low, regression, and time series in this video, and we will be looking at learning curve in the next video. Okay, fine. With that note, high-low method, very simple. What happens with high-low method is this. Let's see. Okay. The high-low method is essentially trying to establish a linear trend, a linear movement, even though you have multiple historical data. Okay, maybe you have, let's say, you're trying to estimate the future sales of a particular product for the next year, and you have sales data for the past 10 years. Now, in the high-low method, you don't use all the 10 years data. What you do is you look at all the 10 years data and you pick the highest figure and the lowest figure, and you plot it on a map, on a Cartesian plane like this. Just the highest and the lowest. So you have 2 points. What happens when you connect 2 points? You get a straight line. Now, if you had used all the 10 points like this, and if you connect all the 10 points, you're not going to get a straight line, right? Of course, it's going to be curvy because you've got different results. So what you do is you eliminate that possibility of getting a curved line and a curved trend, because that can be very complicated to forecast. It's very difficult to forecast actually. What you do is you just pick the highest and the lowest, connect them, draw a straight line, and forecast based on the straight line. You know that the straight line equation is y is equal to a plus bx. Every straight line has a gradient and the slope of it. So what intercept? So you estimate the intercept and the gradient based on this formula. This is what you do: highest cost minus lowest cost divided by highest activity level minus lowest activity level. That's your gradient. And then you apply it to y is equal to a plus bx formula, and either to the highest point or the lowest point that you used, and get the intercept where the line cuts the x-axis. So once you have that, you can use those two figures, the gradient and the intercept, to forecast your future figure, estimate your future figure. This is what the high-low method does. Now, it's good, it's easy, but the biggest problem I'm sure you've noticed is that it ignores bulk of your data. It only picks the highest and the lowest. And what guarantee is there to say that highest and the lowest figures you've picked? I mean, it's those are extremes, right? That you've picked. So, what's the guarantee that your next? It's actually an outlier. So that address that weakness is addressed by linear regression. Linear regression is a formula method. So you don't necessarily use just the highest and the lowest. You have the two formulae, B and A, gradient and intercept. These are the formulae. Again, you don't need to remember these. You don't need to learn these. These won't get applied. You won't have to apply and do calculations for APM. But what these formulas does is it allows you to use all the data points. So sigma x means total of all the x values. Sigma y means total of all the y values. Sigma xy is all the total of all the products of xy values. So if you have 10 years worth of data, you're going to use all 10 instead of just the highest and the lowest. Apply it, get the B and A, and establish the straight line formula and use it. That's the same thing that is being done here. The formulae has been provided. You can try out the examples. The answers are there, so it's very straightforward. Okay. So with that, actually your syllabus doesn't really go on to looking at time series analysis again. Even here, if you note in the summary, your study text says a brief understanding of this will be adequate. In APM, the emphasis is more likely to be on interpreting results of a set of forecasting calculations provided and evaluating whether it's suitable or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick recap on time series. Time series is essentially, now what happens is a improvement on linear regression. So in linear regression, even though you do apply all the points, you do use all the data points, end of the day you're getting a straight line. Y is equal to a plus bx. And you're thinking that your forecast is lying on the straight line. When you extend the straight line, your forecast is lying somewhere on that straight line. Is this true? What's the guarantee? Even in this image, see, you do establish the straight line, but how many points are actually on the straight line? You notice that with every point, there's a deviation between the straight line and the point itself, the actual data point itself. So what time series does is it looks at all these deviations, looks at all the deviations from the data point to the straight line in the past. So if you note, for example, every January, for the past 10 years, when you look at analyze the figures between the straight line and the point, there has always been a 10% deviation. So what do? What time series does is it says take that 10% deviation and apply it to the future also. So if you're forecasting a future January figure, what will you do? You will not stop at just using the figure on the straight line. You're going to apply that 10% deviation on that point and say the forecast is straight line plus 10% or minus 10% or whatever. That's what time series analysis does. It looks at a time-based deviation pattern in the past and takes those deviations, averages those deviations, and applies it to the future forecasts that are on the straight line. Because literally, you cannot expect the forecast to be on the straight line if it hasn't lied on the past. The straight line that you use or develop using linear regression is just a good representation of all the data. Doesn't mean it's going to be an accurate representation. So to make it more accurate, you can use this technique of applying consistent deviations. Now, of course, this has its own issues, like the fact that how many, I mean, even though I told you that every January, yes, you have a deviation. Like, for example, seasonal sales, right? If you have something like Christmas season, which is like a high sales volume period, or holiday season, what happens is that every holiday season you will see a deviation from the straight line. Every holiday season, maybe you see a jump, and every maybe autumn or fall, you see a slope, you see a slump in the sales. So you take those deviations and you apply it to the future seasonal sales estimates. That's what time series does. Just the gist of it, and that understanding is more than enough. Even though I will include these a few examples for you to try, but even your study text doesn't require that. So on that note, I hope you have a clear understanding of high-low method, regression analysis, and time series. We will be looking at the final method, which is somewhat different to these modes of forecasting, because the science and the circumstance is different. Learning curve effect in the next video. Thank you so much. Good luck.